to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, this is Collett Smart. I'm a psychologist and a teacher, and I'm your host on Raising Teens. I'm also a parent, and so I'm in the middle of raising my own teens and young adults. I know that raising teens can be fun and crazy and exciting, but also terrifying and even lonely. I've experienced all of these emotions, sometimes all in the same day. On this podcast, I'm joined by well-known experts, and we will chat about some of the most common questions I get asked about raising teenagers in my own work, and even some questions I've had myself. I have such hope for this generation of young people. So each episode is jam-packed with support so that you can get on with the job that you do best. That is connecting with and loving your teen. Susan McLean is Australia's leading expert in the area of cyber safety and was a member of Victoria Police for 27 years. She was the first Victoria police officer appointed to a position involving cyber safety and young people, where she established and managed the Victoria Police Cyber Safety Project. She's completed advanced training in child safety online in the USA and the UK. She has also been awarded the National Medal, the Victoria Police Service Medal, Second Class, and the National Police Medal. Susan presents to over 250,000 students every year, as well as tens of thousands of parents and educators, both within Australia and internationally. Susan is a published author with her book Sexts, Texts and Selfies, acknowledged as the definitive guide to online safety.
Please be advised that this episode contains discussion around the topics of pornography, sexually explicit material, child abuse material, and extortion. If you or your teen are victims of sexual extortion, please contact your local police immediately.
So, Susan, you and I have known each other for quite some time. I've heard you speak often. Occasionally we've shared a stage, but I remember when my youngest son started high school last year and we got an email from the school that you were the speaker on cyber safety. I was like, hooray! I was so thrilled because my husband's heard me talk his ear off about you a lot. Your book sits on my bedside table. And now he and my son got to hear you finally. And I think I appreciated it a lot because my son's school sent an email which kind of implied that it was compulsory for all students and their parents, or at least one parent to attend. And for me, this puts parents on the same page at the start of high school. So there's no child who can say that their parent is the only one with boundaries with technology. And in your book, Sext, Texts and Selfies, you have this section called Common Sense Begins at Home. Can you give us a bit of a rundown of some of the main areas that you cover for parents and carers, particularly at the start of high school when they might hand over a phone for the first time or a laptop for the first time? I think sometimes you talk about this as the 3 R's of cyber safety.
Yeah, and I do. And I think, the schools that are very proactive and jump on this really early on reap the rewards. They reap them within the school environment and they reap them in what they have to deal with because, as you said, it puts the student and the parent and the school on the same page, very clear. So very successful events, the joint Year 7 student and parent nights. But the 3 R's I always talk about are respect, responsibility, and reputation. So before you touch a device, before you press send, enter, upload, download, like, or share, pause and ask yourself those 3 questions. Is what I'm about to do showing respect to myself, my body, and others? Is what I'm about to do responsible? So not can you do it, because that's a different concept. You can do whatever you like by pressing a button. But is this actually what I was given this technology for? And lastly, how is what I'm about to do going to impact my digital reputation? Not if it can it or will it, how will it? If someone took this comment or this picture or this video or this post and used it in isolation to judge me, how would it look for me?
Yeah, so I think often as parents, we forget that our children are immersed in this world that we think we kind of have an idea of, and we just don't have any clue a lot of the time what they're accessing. Before I get into some of that, what are some of the changes that you might have seen since the start of the pandemic? Because I've seen on your social media pages you talking about being really busy at the moment. What's happened for schools and for families as we've come out of lockdown?
Look, I think in every single family, the foot was taken off the pedal when it came to technology use during COVID. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, because basically we all had to get by. And, if you're from Melbourne, the most locked down city in the entire universe, it was tough going. So, no one could expect everything to remain the same. There had to be give and take. And, you were trying to manage kids online, trying to manage work. Something had to give. But what I've seen since we're sort of back to COVID normal, if you like, is the problems that have arisen from that. So the lax rules that were perfectly fine during COVID because there wasn't an option are still there. And parents are struggling to regain control of the devices. The same at school, because they didn't have that face-to-face communication. They weren't interacting in person. They lost the ability to have, an honest disagreement, if you like.
Yeah.
So they go each other online without understanding the potential harm and the damage that that's causing.
And so this brings me to, again, talking about how you're my favorite no-nonsense cybercop, because you don't mince words, Susan, and I appreciate that. And I know it's because of the work that you do and what you've seen in families. So you talk very often about how we don't know what we don't know. Susan talks a lot about sexting in her book. The word sexting is actually a combination of two words, sex and texting. It involves taking, sending, or sharing naked or sexually explicit images, videos, as well as sexually explicit messages. Here is an excerpt from Susan's book.
This excerpt is from Susan McLean's book, Sexts, Texts and Selfies: How to Keep Your Children Safe in the Digital Space. She writes, "One thing that my experience in dealing with these issues over many years has taught me is that it is extremely difficult to pick those most likely. There is no one type of child who stands out. All young people can bow to pressure if it is consistent enough. Often it's the kid who normally makes good decisions, is well behaved and never in trouble at school. This can come like a bolt out of the blue for both parents and teachers."
So Susan, can you talk to us a little bit about sexting, sending nudes? What are you seeing? How early is it happening? Give our parents a bit of a snapshot, because as you said, we don't know what we don't know.
And I think too, parents often base their own decisions around parenting in the digital space on their own experiences online. And of course, that's not going to be aligned with your children either, because the algorithms that feed content to you are very different to the algorithms that are going to feed suggested content to your children. So just because you find a platform quite harmless does not mean that's the same for your children. But when it comes to the sharing of sexual imagery, unfortunately, I'm dealing with that in primary school quite regularly. It's not so much of the romantic sharing that tends to hit once you hit secondary school, but younger and younger children are being targeted online by pedophiles, and they are being convinced to strip naked and share photos or videos. So an example that I give, and I can see the look in parents' eyes when I say this. I recently read a chat log between an offender and a young child, and the time it took that offender to convince the child to strip naked on a webcam was 10 minutes.
Good
that was
grief.
it from go to woe. So parents are sitting there going, God, I asked my child to pick up their dirty laundry and it takes them 2 hours to do that. How on earth can this happen? And that's the thing, is that no one wants to think that this will happen to their child. Of course they don't. But if you have a person under the age of 18 years in your life and they're using technology, they're a potential victim. Good kids can and do make poor choices. The other thing that I've seen is just the volume of pressure the consistent pressure on young girls in particular to share nude photos. So I would be hard pressed to find any young girl at the end of year 7 who has not been sent or asked for a nude photo. They would be like hen's teeth.
Wow.
And it's a combination of things. You know, they want to fit in. They're getting a bit sexy and flirty. They're developing. They're going through puberty or they've gone through puberty. They've discovered boys or girls depending on what they like. And they're growing up in such an overtly sexualized world. So as an adult, you can be discerning about sex. You can be discerning about the lyrics to songs or video clips or advertisements in shopping centres. But children can't. And we all know the saying, sex sells. Kim Kardashian's probably got a 57 sex tape coming out soon. You know, kids get this misguided belief that if it's okay for person A, then it must be okay for me. And then there's the pressure that, you know, if you really liked me, you'd send a nude, or if you trusted me, you'd send a nude.
When young people are starting out in a new relationship, it's so normal for them to want to please a new partner. But in abusive relationships, emotional blackmail is something that can be used to pressure young people into sending sexually explicit content. We talk about consent in Season 4, Episode 5, if you want to go back and have a listen.
It's cultural as well. But we have to make sure that young people understand that, you know, they are never the sum of a naked body part photo. That is not how to judge their self-esteem or their self-worth.
Yeah. So can I just go back to you mentioned something about algorithms. For parents who don't understand what you mean about algorithms, can you explain that?
So very basically, every single time you use a digital device that's connected to the internet, every app that you're using, even a search engine, is gathering data on you. Now, on some social media platforms, you can turn that off. You can limit what they can gather, things like that. But essentially what they know is, and all the parents listening will know this, they have gone online and they have either searched for or purchased product A. Immediately their feed is going to be full of product A or something similar, because the algorithm, the back end knows that you've just looked up, you know, knee-high black boots. So here are 57 other versions of knee-high black boots that you might like to buy. You know, just this week I had to buy an under-desk storage for my desk because the shelving thing broke, you know, which I purchased. The amount of ads I've got for another one, like, do you really think I'm going to buy 10 of them? Like, one is enough, but I'm bombarded. So things you look at, things you view, things you search for, all put a pattern, like a fingerprint of what your interests might be. So if you're on YouTube, for example, and you're watching cute little girls dancing, you are going to be suggested lots and lots of videos of cute little girls dancing. If you watch gardening videos, you will be suggested gardening videos because they know that that is something potentially that you might be interested in. So we know that if young people, even inadvertently, look up something that's sexual, they type the rude word in, you know, bum, tit, something like that, which they're all going to do.
Out of curiosity.
You know, the internet doesn't know that that's Johnny, age 6, you know, working out what body parts are. They're going to start to bombard that child with inappropriate content. You know, the number one song very recently, and I don't know whether it's currently, but it certainly was for most of last year, the number one song that little girls were dancing to, lip syncing and uploading to TikTok was a song by, I'm sure they're your favorite artists as well, Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. And that song is called WAP. Now, to the parents out there that have no idea what WAP is, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to set a homework task. So you can Google WAP lyrics, and you can see what your little daughters and their sons are watching and singing along to. But I do have some advice. Do not Google that on any work-issued device. Okay, that's a little tip.
Thank you,
because
Susan.
you will set off alarm bells, shall we say. So it is that overtly sexualized world where kids think they need to do this to be accepted.
Yeah, and gain the likes and the followers and so on.
Yep.
And so this kind of leads me to thinking then about one of the issues we've seen a lot in the media lately, and this is the issue of sextortion. We've seen it with young boys a whole lot. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing with this issue of sextortion?
Yeah. So sextortion's been a thing for, I would suggest, around 12 to 15 years. And I can still remember doing some FBI training in America, and I sat through this thing, a lesson on sextortion. I was like, oh, what is this? I'd never heard of it. And it's essentially the word sex and extortion, which is another word for blackmail, put together. Now, when this first became a crime, the only victims were adults. Only. I never dealt with children. I never even discussed sextortion in a secondary presentation, ever, ever, ever. I would talk to parents about it, more so for their own benefit, but never because of their children. Probably from the start of last year, I include sextortion in all my secondary presentations because, as you said, there has been a 400% increase in the reporting to the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, of this type of crime with an adolescent male offender.
This is an immediate issue. And even since chatting to Susan on the podcast, she's posted this on social media. In the past 24 hours, I have had 3 parents contact me seeking advice on the fact that their teen or young adult son had been a victim of sextortion. This is one of the fastest growing crimes, and the majority of victims are young males. Please, please talk to your sons and your daughters about this.
So it's huge. It is absolutely huge. And
Wow.
the way it tends to work is an account is set up looking like it's a hot girl, engages with the young adolescent, sexy flirty chat happens. The young girl's account will send the nude first. So they always do it first to sort of lull you into the, well, you've got one of me, send one back. And then eventually the young boy will either send a picture back or a video. And I had one boy a couple of years ago, he said, oh, I sent an action video. So you could imagine what that was. The minute they have that, then they're going to blackmail for money. And they don't care that it's a kid that essentially has no income stream, because these are organized criminal gangs that set up in call centers in Eastern Europe, Russia, and Africa. They basically just pepper the internet with bait. They wait for someone to take it and away they go. So I recently put a post up on my Facebook page about a terrible case from California, a 17-year-old boy called Ryan. That's exactly what happened to him. They demanded $5,000 to start with. He bartered them down to $150, which he paid. And then the demands kept happening, which of course they will. 3 hours after he had that first demand, he tragically took his own life. And it's just the most horrible case. But I am aware of 2 similar cases in Australia. When I posted that to my Facebook page, I was immediately contacted by 2 Australian families. One whose granddaughter had become a victim and she'd been stepped up how to set up a PayPal account to pay her debt. And another from a mum who had a 17-year-old son who had paid $3,000 because he had money in the bank, and then rang her hysterically crying, begging for more to fix a debt. And she said, the level of distress I heard in my son's voice, I never want to hear again. I am totally heartbroken. And these are average Aussie families. There is nothing unique or strange or different about them. But kids are essentially vulnerable. They are essentially trusting. So they are the perfect victim of this type of crime.
And so what advice do you give to parents about looking out for this, what they do when it happens? How are you dealing with this with parents in your seminars?
Yep. So what we want to do is obviously avoid is the best option. So, in a perfect world, that's what we do, but that's not realistic. So anything, make sure that you have rules and boundaries for technology use in your house. Never hand over a device with blind trust and absolute ignorance. But let your children know that no matter what, and I mean no matter what, they can come to you if they've got themselves into a spot of bother. I don't expect you to be happy or delighted about what they tell you, but they need to know they can come to you and you will help them, whatever that help looks like.
This conversation with Susan prompted us to talk with our own children at home about sextortion specifically. Previously, you would have heard us talk on the podcast about how teens often have trouble deciding what to do in the moment. It's so important for us as parents to use examples in the media to discuss and ask them what they would do if they or a friend were in a situation, so that the decisions have already been thought through when something comes up.
So making sure that they know that your door is always open, and if they get themselves in this situation, they can come to you. Obviously, avoiding it first. Best option is to get devices with cameras and internet connections out of bedrooms and bathrooms, because your child is not going to strip naked at the kitchen table nor waltz naked out of the shower and ask how they're looking. So is that going to stop this? No, but it is going to substantially reduce it. So that's what we're aiming for. You can't remove the risk associated with technology use, but what you can is identify what the risk is or know what it is, minimize and manage it. So we get those devices where we can see them. If your child comes to you and says this has happened, obviously don't panic, take a deep breath, let them know that telling you was the right thing to do. Gather as much evidence as you can. So screenshots of everything, the chat, the accounts, bank details, like whatever you've got, then log off and walk away from the device. Don't fiddle with it. Obviously don't pay anything and don't send any more photos. And then take everything to the local police station and make a report, because it is a crime and it will be taken seriously. So when this first started, 99% of the offenders were that organised criminal gang. They were solely after money. But what we've seen now is child sex offenders go, oh, well, it's an opening for me here. So they're doing this as well. They'll have a crack at a bit of money to start with, but they're a bit more realistic. They understand kids don't have money. So what they'll ask for is more photos. So they'll say, right, okay, fine. If you can't pay me $5,000, I want 10 photos of you naked in the shower by tomorrow morning. If you don't send those 10 photos, I will post what I've got. And then they can get those images and they can sell them and they can make money that way. So what you must never do if you or your children are ever the victim of an online scam or ransom is you don't pay a cent, because the minute you pay something, you are showing a willingness to pay and a capacity to pay. So they're just going to keep going. So it's gather everything, remain calm, log off, walk away. And again, depending on the situation, how distressed your child is, off to the GP, link into a psychologist, all of those things, and let the school know.
Yes.
Never be embarrassed about this, because your child has gone through a trauma, a very significant trauma if this has happened to them. And you need the school on board to help your child, not necessarily related to the trauma, but the fact that they may be short-tempered, or they may not be switched on in class, or they may, withdraw from their friends. All of that support at the school level is vital.
Yeah, very important. And so talking about schools then, I've heard you also give warnings about some schools not doing all they can to protect students. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen and the advice that you do give to schools about keeping students safe?
Yeah, so first and foremost, schools have a legal duty of care to keep their students safe. Now, several teachers didn't seem to understand this during remote learning, and they thought that if it was online lessons and the child wasn't at school, it was not their problem what went down on the internet. And of course, they learnt very quickly that they still are legally responsible for the safety of that child. So getting them to understand their duty of care is really important. But it's like anything. If you lay the foundations, build upon them, have the good policy, the good education and practice, you will reap the rewards of that. So schools need to have dedicated policy around digital device use, acceptable use of devices, cyberbullying, bullying, photography, all of those things. The policy need to be backed up by practice. They need to also make it very clear what to do if the child has a problem. Who do I tell? Where do I go? What do you expect of me? Students also need to know what a breach of the school rules are. Don't just assume they know. One of the things that I do often is I review policies for schools and organisations. And can I tell you, there are some documents I've sent that I don't even understand. Now, if I can't make head nor tail of them, and this is a document that not only are you expecting Johnny Jones to sign in year 10, but Mr. and Mrs. Jones as well, you've got no hope. If push comes to shove and this is what is going to be the basis of some sort of court case, The fact that I didn't know what I was signing, I didn't understand what I was signing, how could you expect me to think it was that when it looked like that? This is a problem. So the documentation needs to be very clear, and it needs to be backed up by education. You can't just go to a kid, hey, here's a device, go for your life. I expect you to be, sensible. And I have schools say, we don't filter the internet. We expect our students to make good choices. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah. I know there's a number of hostels and boarding schools who there's no filtering, and that's very concerning.
Yeah, it is concerning because what happens on your premises is 100% your responsibility. And all that has to be proven in a court case, if you're looking at an injury and a duty of care, is could you have reasonably foreseen this issue? And of course, the answer is yes. Of course, you're going to foresee that a child's going to look up porn whilst they're at school, because that's what children do. So we've got to have good policy. We have to have education. We've got to make sure the parent, the student, and the teacher are all educated. They have to get consent. So the other thing that I saw during COVID, and it did my head in, was schools sending YouTube links. Hey, click on this, watch this, and do a lesson. No, because you don't know what is embedded in that link. You think it's something useful, and it might be, but it might not be. And, there is some good stuff on YouTube. I'm not saying that, but they don't make it easy for educators, because technically you can't download it, store it, and share it that way. You have to share it as a live link. You can't fiddle with it if you're not the owner of the intellectual property. And so essentially when you give it to a child to watch, you have to hope for the best. So that's not going to cover your duty of care requirements. I saw teachers setting lessons on TikTok, do a TikTok activity and film it and send it back to me. I saw Facebook Live events. I saw teachers recording like the Zoom screen with all the students with their full names and then posting that to public accounts. And, it did my head in. I was just playing whack-a-mole, trying to shut this down. But before any app or platform can be used in education, it has to pass what is called a PIA, a Privacy Impact Assessment. And I can help you out right now. There is not a social media platform in existence that will pass a PIA. So forget it. Don't even go there, because it's not going to work. But if you come across a really good app that you found and you think, that would really enhance the learning of my students, well, then you have to have an educational rationale for the educational merit of it. It has to pass the PIA. Then you have to let the parent know that you would like to get consent from the parent for the child to use this particular app or platform. If you don't do that, you don't have a leg to stand on, and you're not covering all your bases. We've also got to educate parents to ask questions, because they go along the lines of, well, I just assumed the school had my child's best interests at heart. And deep down they do. But, when I was contacting schools about that TikTok issue, what I found is teachers were going off on a limb, and the poor principal was having conniptions because he or she had no idea what his staff were doing. And they were mortified when it was brought to their attention. So we need to educate parents not just to accept that just because something is promoted as an educational app, it might not be. It might have huge privacy concerns. You've got to do your due diligence. You hope the school is doing the right thing. But ultimately, the bottom line is you giving that informed consent, so you know what you're giving consent for.
Both as schools and as parents, it's so important to be protecting our young people. It might be from predators online, or it might be from their own impulsive choices. When they've sent something, whether it's to a partner or a stranger, this is distributing child abuse material. It's a criminal act even if they're sending it willingly. It's still illegal. Especially in this world where things remain online forever, even on platforms like Snapchat, where our teens think the image is gone once it disappears. The online traces are there forever, and you don't know if the person has saved it or taken an image of it before it's disappeared. And so is there anything you would like to leave with parents who have children starting high school? What is something that you think is vital that they need to know?
That just because your child is tech savvy, which they are, does not mean that remotely aligns to their level of brain or cognitive development. So what we know is there's a massive and glaring gap between what children can do and what they actually have the capacity to understand. So you don't give devices with blind trust and absolute ignorance. You control the device, you set the rules and boundaries, lock it down as much as you can, and make sure that you are an active participant in your child's online world, because that is the best protective factor that there is. An involved parent in their child's digital life.
And so finally, Susan, what is your biggest hope for your field of work?
It would be nice if, I was out of work because there was no need for me. That's never going to happen. I can't foresee that. But I think that, there is certainly an acceptance now that we need to get on top of this, that cyberbullying, sharing nudes and grooming is a significant issue for our young people, because for many years people would tell me I was overreacting or really wasn't a thing, or, you only look at the negatives. Well, no, I have the sobbing parent and student every day in my ear. So my mantra is educate to prevent. So that's what I aim for. The more people that have access to the correct information, the safer all children will be.
There are so many fun aspects to young people being online, but Susan reminded me about the very real dangers. It's so important for us to have these frank conversations and to acknowledge that it creates a feeling of embarrassment in our child. But we don't want shame to be the hurdle that stops our teens from coming to talk with us. If you would like to know more about Susan, her book, or invite her to your school, you can find her at cybersafetysolutions.com.au. You can also find me or leave a question for a future episode at raisingteenagers.com.au or via the Raising Teens page at hopepodcast.com.au. Please subscribe and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love to see you next episode, and in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
This episode was hosted by Collett Smart, edited and produced by Alec Green, imaging by Lucy Weil, and social media by Beth Rivers.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.